Hi, my name is Mike Cowley-Freeman, and I'm covering for Dave Bailey today. And we've got a really great session for you this afternoon. Last week, we saw a very successful workshop that ran within PDS, which looked at migrating SharePoint. Now, migration of SharePoint is a really important task and a really beneficial task when it's done. However, we appreciate it's not easy, and there's no one way of doing it. So the idea behind the workshop was to bring people together and to talk about what we do and how we do things and what's the best way to take it forward. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Rachel Robinson and Tom Connor, who were very instrumental in delivering a very successful workshop. So I'm going to ask Rachel to come onto the screen now. And can I first of all ask you, Rach, what was the driver behind you actually running and creating this workshop?
Thanks, Mike. As a business engagement manager, part of our role is to engage with our forces in the different regions across the country. And through these conversations with forces, it became quite apparent that there are a number of forces struggling with how to start that migration piece, or if they've started it, what do things look like in the new world? So ultimately it's that journey from on-prem to the cloud, but then when we get there, it's all those other little things like retention of documents, it's the access, it's permissions, it's policy and governance, the structure that sits around it that seems to be causing headaches for people.
Brilliant. And so the workshop went really, really well. I was fortunate enough to sit in the background and watch it. For you, what do you think were the key takeaway from it that forces should be thinking about as they approach this project?
Yeah, I think it's been demonstrated from the forces we've had present so far that ultimately there is no one way of carrying out this particular activity. It does really come down to that local force decision. What we're trying to do here is share best practice from those forces that have taken that step and have started that migration journey, or have moved, but ultimately are still trying to find their feet and work out what good looks like. So we've been really fortunate to have had support from forces like Kent and Essex, Lancs, Lancashire, Cheshire, West Midlands, Merseyside, Gwent, and then we've obviously had Tom from PDS, who brought us back to the attention of the fact that we do have blueprints that ultimately guide forces to a point, but again, come back to that issue that these are local decisions that need to be taken. Off the back of this, just to make sure that we've got access to everything and that the forces can come back and reread and look at material. There is a SharePoint channel available to them in the collaboration team. They will find in there the previous presentations from all the forces that we've had so far. We've got the recordings of the 2 sessions that we've ran, and any user documents, any material that forces have been kind enough to share with us is all hosted inside that SharePoint channel.
Yeah. Brilliant. No, that's really helpful. And I think that's the thing. There's lots of information out there to help forces, but it is down to that local decision. And I think that's the gist of sort of the context of Tom's presentation, which we're going to come on to in a second, which is about how they need to consider different areas to make sure that they are doing it in the right way.
Absolutely. I think that's what we need to think about as well. We've seen really good presentations from forces so far, but it's down to the individuals, it's down to those in force that are working on these activities, that are part of those SharePoint project teams, to come forward and continue to drive this conversation, bring to our attention activity that's happening in their forces, make us aware of other issues, of the little things that we might have missed to this point, so that we can address them, bring them together and discuss collectively. But yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rach. So I'll bring Tom onto the screen now. So Tom, you did a great presentation at the event, which sort of gave that sort of food for thought. I believe you're going to give that presentation, or part of that presentation, for people to consider now.
Yeah, absolutely. So this presentation is really showing off some of the aspects of not only the sort of the design decisions and some of the key ones that are coming from the designs, but also some additional information that is within the designs that is showing not necessarily a technical design approach, but more around considerations of actually how as a business you would support your migration to SharePoint Online. So right, let me begin. So for those that haven't met me before or been on any of the presentations, my name is Thomas Connor. I'm a tech architect within PDS, but I worked for about 4 years on the NEP program, so supporting forces with their move to Office 365. So, you know, a big advocate about the wider Office 365 suite of services, but was also, prior to joining NEP, I worked within Norfolk and Suffolk Police, within the IT department, and again, using Microsoft services, including SharePoint there. So just as a little bit of a sort of a background, just in terms of the storage, which is the question that is raised, each force or each tenant has a specific allocation of SharePoint storage. That is 1 terabyte for the tenant, and then every licensed user gets an additional 10 gigabytes that is allocated to that SharePoint pot. So depending on the size of your force, the number of users that you have, that will then determine the amount of overall storage that you have. Just a clarification, OneDrive is separate to that. There is a specific allocation to each licensed OneDrive user. And within the designs, there are a couple of design decisions. And this is, again, this is just a lot of the majority of the design decisions around SharePoint, around not the security controls that define how sharing, etc., is defined, but specifically around things such as setting limits. And this is done just to ensure that there is no growth that could happen in an uncontrolled manner. So the default is, if you're setting up new sites, set them with a 100 gigabyte limit. That way a site cannot suddenly consume all of your storage across the organization. And the same with that 1 terabyte for OneDrive. But these can be configured locally by the force depending on your specific requirements. And I think that's a big thing to underline. There's a lot of things here that you have a control to define based on your needs. Just the thing to clarify as part of that storage is that the new stream that relies on SharePoint, where there was a specific stream storage allocation, that is no longer separated within SharePoint. So your stream videos, if saved to stream, to meetings, etc., they will be stored within SharePoint, so therefore take part of that SharePoint allocation. If a user saves a recording, that will be part of their OneDrive allocation. So just something to be mindful of. So looking at the migration itself, again, these are the things that you as a local force need to be understanding. You're the ones that understand your data, understand your business requirements, and therefore are really the best ones. And this is where getting that understanding, but if need be, engaging with Microsoft or a Microsoft partner, just to kind of get that deeper understanding of the approaches that are needed based on your needs. But the big point on this one, and I think this is the thing that we are really sort of trying to avoid forces missing this step, which is looking at your existing data, understanding what that existing data is, but more importantly, if that existing data is no longer used, either archive it and make sure it's not part of your migration, so it doesn't end up in SharePoint Online and ends up consuming a large proportion of your storage allocation when it's not needed. Or ultimately, is this an opportunity that you could provide, carry out those reviews and at that point delete that data. This is something that forces are going to be doing anyway as part of their sort of day-to-day management of their environments, and there's lots of tools that can be used as part of this. We used to use in Force a really cheap tool called TreeView, but it gave you that ability to see where your data was, see when it was last updated, any significantly large files that are located, and you can manage it that way. Other point around the migration is potential to use RBAC as part of the move. And again, it's looking at the question of the permissions that are applied within Force. Is there an opportunity that this permission model that is currently deployed be simplified? And it's starting your SharePoint migration not necessarily as a right, we're going to migrate absolutely everything over the course of 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever, but it's actually looking at maybe starting off small in terms of areas that are more easily managed, and then it will allow you to configure permissions. So, for example, on a department level, you may decide that that's our initial approach. You could configure an RBAC model through the Identity Now and through Azure Active Directory. And every time someone becomes a member of that particular department, the permissions would be inherited. It's when you start to get into that more granular permission models that things do become more complicated. But if you start off in a way that allows you to become, simplify at the beginning and then become more granular, it does become an easier approach than necessarily starting off with a granular model, which becomes incredibly difficult to try and map out. The other thing is around a taxonomy. Now, this is a really fantastic feature with SharePoint, and it's been within SharePoint when it was an on-premise tool, and it allows you to create a defined set of organizational metadata. And this metadata is constructed at an organizational level, but you can then define it across your sites. So you could have a taxonomy that includes, simplistically, department names. And that way, that if a department name is being used to tag a document, you're always going to be linking back to that defined list. So instead of someone calling it HR and someone else calling it human resources, if you're doing a search, you're always going to be able to bring that back. So the steps of actually working through the migration, it's understanding that data, it's getting a complete view of actually what it is that you're looking to move across, understanding what those requirements are from an organizational perspective, and then how do you address any remediation that needs to be carried out. I mean, that may be something along the lines of, we've still got an awful lot of the old file format doc files, and actually do we want to take the opportunity of running tools and uplifting those to the latest version of the Office standard, and that just increases some of the functionality within Office 365, such as co-authoring, etc. What's the scope? And I think this is a key one, and it doesn't have to be a single scope. You can build this in blocks, but understanding what is the scope of each of those blocks as you start to move through your migration, and making sure that your users are aware of what's happening. There are going to be changes in how they work. The traditional file explorer is very much takes a back seat in how you work with files once they're stored in SharePoint online. And is this going to be something that is going to be tied really closely with your team's deployment? In which case, again, you may find that although SharePoint is sitting on the back end from a storage perspective, the interaction with users is taking place via Teams. Another item around users or you as a force and how you can work with the design blueprints is around that versioning. The versioning is in there to ensure, again, from a blueprint, from a national assurance perspective, that there are controls in place that ensure that data is protected to a level that gave the national accreditor confidence in the support and the migration to 365. Now, 500 major versions, that's sort of the most that can be set, but it gives you that ability to roll back in the event of, a document having a big chunk of data removed out of it, etc., etc. So that is almost like your backup solution to documents that are maybe changed and something deleted by another user. If a document isn't changed regularly, it's not likely to get to that 500 limit. But if you've got a document that is a living document and it's continually changing, that 500 limit could become really useful. So think carefully around actually bringing that down too low, because then you'd get to the point where you could bring it down to 100, but you've got a document that receives 10 people working on it making changes, and all of a sudden that 100 changes could be taken up very quickly, and you might only be able to roll back maybe several hours in terms of recovery. In terms of the retention, now documents, when they're deleted, they will go into recycle bin. There's the facility for users to recover that. Documents can be recovered for about 3 months, but after that point, documents are not user recoverable. They are still within the tenant because of the retention policies, and they can be accessed via the compliance tools. But bearing in mind that this has become challenging in terms of recovering data, it's not designed for that. It is more designed for, say, that security and compliance perspective. So that's just a consideration around that versioning. But again, user education, awareness that there are those recycle bins available. And also in the event of users leaving the organization, the content would stay within their OneDrive while their account is still allocated an Office 365 license. But at the point of them leaving the organization, again, that OneDrive storage for that user will be deleted. And then finally, around the monitoring, the designs specify and mention the Security and Compliance Center. This is now a legacy tool. There is a design update that is coming that is actually going to then look at the two new tools. So we've got the Defender portal, which is the security center. That is very much looking at your information security team, your cyber team, understanding what is happening within your tenant purely from a security perspective. But the key one as well around your information management is going to be the compliance center. And this is where you have tools such as data loss prevention, defining your security labels, and actually just keeping a real eye of what happens within your tenant and who is sharing data, what type of data is within your tenant, etc. So, those are the kind of the key tools that are available to you. But certainly having a good understanding and having key roles defined within the organization around the security and the compliance centers will give you that confidence as to how data is being stored within SharePoint and making sure that you're always ahead of any potential risks that could come with users sharing data and similar. So that was just the presentation. If there are any questions that have come in, I'm not sure we've got any there, but happy to take those if needed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm just bringing Rachel and myself onto the screen. We don't have any questions at the moment. I've got a couple that I've sort of written down, which I think have come up in the past, and it's worth reiterating. So I suppose the first question is, with a project like this, what type of team do you need? What sort of size of team do you need to deliver this? Or is it not that straightforward to say you need 3, 5, these are the roles?
I don't think there's a size of team, but there's a responsibilities of team. I think, of course, there's going to be your technical resource that is going to support with the physical move, but I think there's organizational change that not only needs to look at the change of how is operating within SharePoint a consideration going forward, but looking at, are there new opportunities within Office 365 in how we work with our shared content, that's stored within traditional file shares? Is that significantly changing? Because I think if you just do a lift and shift and take your shared drives in exactly the same structure and place them in SharePoint Online, there's a risk of you're going to miss the opportunities that working with Office 365 and the wider tools provides. So looking at this alongside teams, don't be thinking about SharePoint in isolation, because I think there's a lot of functionality with certain areas where Teams is the better place to be moving this data, getting those users working together. SharePoint as a standalone tool, and when I say standalone, what I mean is that there's not a team that is sitting over the top of that SharePoint data, is obviously, of course, intranet, but where you've got corporate informations, policies, corporate type assets, those types of things, where you want to make them available to the organization as a whole, but actually you're not looking at a level of collaboration as part of that information.
So it really has to sit alongside your business change. Sorry, Rachel, it sits alongside your business change strategy.
Absolutely,
whether it be department or force.
Yes, and I think that needs to be defined and really understood as how, as an organization, you're going to adopt the Office 365 and how you're going to use it before you start to look at how we're now going to move that data into SharePoint.
Thank you. Sorry, Rachel, I cut across you.
No, that's fine. I think I was just going to go back to some of the comments that we had from Kent and Essex and bring back what Cheshire are up to. So Kent and Essex have took that position that everybody's got a responsibility in this. It isn't an IT project. It isn't a business change project. Everybody, every department, every individual that's got data sitting somewhere has got a part to play in this. This is a real opportunity to have a look at the data you've got and have that clear out the dead wood and kind of move yourself into this new environment in a much better, healthier position. I think Cheshire as well highlighted the fact that they've looked at this not as one project, not just SharePoint migration, that there are several project teams being stood up to manage this. And they've identified bigger departments that are going to take a little bit more resource and time to think about because of the types of data and the content that they've got. Whereas others, I don't want to refer to them as quick wins, but will be simpler and easier to work through. But to do that, they have stood up a number of teams rather than one project team as a whole.
And I think just the other thing, just to add to that, is senior sponsorship. And I think the more senior, the better. It is going to be a change. There's going to be those that love it. There are going to be those that hate it while they start to adapt. But getting that sponsorship, getting that communication as to this is how we are moving forward, but also there's an element of understanding what a timeline is. I would certainly say having a clear timeline of 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be, depending on the size of the force, that is the goal that is being set, and we must finish the migration there. I think leaving forces and your users in a state of limbo where they've got some information in one location and other data sitting in SharePoint online is only going to complicate the issue.
And there's the fear that people will forget about the migration bit and just result or use what they currently have and what they're used to. Brilliant. There is a question that's come in on the chat from Kyle, who's asked, when forces change their forever retention policy to something more reasonable, have you noticed an issue with files that we deleted up until that point being deleted from the preservation hold library?
If you're, so my understanding, again, this might need to get some just some confirmation on this, but my understanding is if you bring those retention policies down, then the threshold that is set, if there is anything older than that is within your prevention hold, and that new retention policy is applied to the original location of that document, it would get deleted because it's no longer being retained as part of a policy. So if you were set for forever and you deleted content and it went into that preservation hold, understanding is that if you bring that threshold below the date, that document would then be deleted permanently.
Thank you. If there's one takeaway that the pair of you, the key message about this topic, what would it be?
Do it. And I think, we was talking earlier around the Nike swish and the just do it, but I think there is opportunities here. There are going to be significant savings in terms of the infrastructure that is currently in place in forces, but don't rush into it without having a good plan and understanding what the steps are. Work with a partner to kind of really bottom that out, because if you jump too quickly, you're potentially making this position even worse for yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Rachel, once again, where can people see or find the recording from last week's workshop?
Yeah, so if you have your guest access for the PDS tenant, then within the Force Collaboration team, there is a SharePoint channel set up specifically for this conversation. Within that, you will find recordings from the 2 sessions we've held now. You will find the presentations from all the forces that have supported us, and the one that Tom has just shared with us again kindly. Within that, there is also a frequently asked questions document that we have been maintaining and updating from the first session, and now we'll do that for the second session. The conversation is in there. Forces are using it. They're coming in and asking questions. They're sharing. It's good to see that conversation is happening, but it's important to remember that to access that, you need to come in on your guest account in order to access the PDS tenant and into that team and into that particular channel.
Wonderful. And my colleagues Russ and Esther have very kindly put some links in the chat which will be able, if you are not already a member, to click on those, complete out the access form, and we'll grant that access as soon as we possibly can. If you're a member of a police force, it is only available for police force and organisations, and then we'll get you in, and then you'll be able to access this. Before I wrap up, I just want to thank both Rachel and Tom for a fantastic webinar. Thank you so much for bringing to light the workshop that happened last week, and the opportunities and considerations that people need to think about as they progress their migration to SharePoint. So thank you both very, very much. Talking about the business engagement managers, and we've shared this slide with you a number of times, but the business engagement team is here to help you with anything and everything related to PDS and technology. You can see the geographical split. Please get in contact with your business engagement manager, and they'll be more than happy to help you in any way, shape or form. We always need and want your feedback on these webinars. They are for you, and we want you to get the best out of them. So if you can get a chance, please scan the QR code, and it'll take you to a form. Complete that feedback, and we'll really welcome any sort of comments you have. If you've liked today's, my name's Mike. If you haven't liked it, I'm David Bailey. It just remains me to say thank you so very much for attending today. We hope that today's been fruitful for you and informative for you, and we look forward to seeing you next week at the Wednesday webinar. Thank you all.